Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, October the 16th, 2025. In a few days' time, Jupiter moves into Cancer. Now, that might sound strange because from a Western perspective, Jupiter has been in Cancer for quite a few months, but from an Eastern sidereal viewpoint, Jupiter, at the time of this recording, is still in late Gemini. And so what I want to do is, in this video, consider what it might mean for Jupiter to move into Cancer sidereally. For example, if you're using Hindu astrology, Vedic astrology, then you will notice that Jupiter is in late Gemini. It hasn't gone into Cancer yet, but what does it mean when Jupiter moves into Cancer? Is it something we should be interested in? But before I consider that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, October the 16th, 2025. So here is the chart for today. In the top right, that is a picture of Jupiter. Just a reminder that Jupiter is what I want to talk about in this video. So the moon is still in Leo, late Leo, and in fact it does move into Virgo at some stage. So from the perspective of London, the moon moves into Virgo at 6 minutes past 7 in the evening. So if you're in the Americas, then late morning, early afternoon, the moon will change sign, will move out of Leo. So that is perhaps one of the big events of the day. Now, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon won't move into Virgo until early tomorrow. So what else is going on apart from moon moving into Virgo? Well, the moon is making a sextile to the sun in late Leo. Moon sextile sun, great aspect. That's what I always say. The moon and the sun, they are the lights, the most important bodies in the sky. So when they are making a fortunate aspect, sextile aspect, that suggests that things should go relatively well and there should be a general sense of harmony. Then when the moon moves into Virgo, it straight away makes a square to Uranus. So the moon square Uranus might stir things up. Moon in Virgo, square Uranus in Gemini. We might be quick to notice things and also quick to respond. If it's not us being quick to respond, it might be someone else, and perhaps we'll be caught off guard by what happens today, or maybe not, because astrologically things are a bit slow. At least on paper, all the action was early in the week, and now just seems to be very little going on, very little to report on. But there are some things happening, like Jupiter moving into sidereal Cancer. From a Vedic perspective, Jupiter is moving into the sign of its exaltation, so that might be something to welcome. But I'll be talking about Jupiter moving into sidereal Cancer at the end of this video. As far as Sydney, Australia is concerned, if we set the chart for Sydney, moon is still in Leo. Moon is at 20 degrees Leo, so it's kind of making a square to Mars. So if you're in Australasia, then the beginning of the day you might pick up on that square to Mars. There might be a certain feeling of anger, but not too much anger, because the moon, having made the sextile to Mars, square to Mars, does make a sextile to the sun, and so all of us, wherever we are, can pick up on the good vibes of the sun-moon sextile. And then there is the heliocentric view. If we put the sun at the center of the solar system. So Mars is still kind of making a square to Venus, or rather Venus is making a square to Mars. I mean, Venus is now, 3.5 degrees off the square, so the power of that square is starting to fade, but Mars is still opposition Uranus. We still have that T-square that I've been going on and on about, Mars opposition Uranus, Venus on the T, but I think, to some extent, that aspect is starting to lose, some of its strength. So, aside from that, I'm not saying that there is, a huge amount going on. Mars is starting to make a sextile to Pluto, and that's perhaps talking about power broking, who's in control, who's in charge, who's calling the shots. But as private individuals, we may not be particularly affected by this sextile. So, when I've been looking at the positions of the planets, both geocentrically and heliocentrically, you might have noticed that, yesterday, today, there hasn't been a great deal to say. And if you watch my video for yesterday, for Wednesday, you might have noticed that some of my interpretations of the 12 signs were brief. I think all of them were. I mean, normally I try to give each sign 5 minutes, but I think there were a couple of signs, or at least certainly one sign, that was less than 3 minutes. And that's not just me sort of slacking off, it's just me reflecting the fact that there isn't a huge amount going on. So perhaps in this video I'm likewise going to be fairly brief. Anyway, so now it's time to talk about my views of the 12 signs, and yes, I might be brief. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, October the 16th, 2025. Aries. It's possibly a day of two parts. The day starts with the moon in Leo, and then it moves into Virgo. So moon in Leo, make the most of it. The moon is pretty close to the fixed star Regulus, and moon is in a fire sign, and so this is perhaps a chance, Aries, to tell the world who you are, and perhaps you want to initiate a few things, if you haven't done it already, but you haven't got all the time in the world, and things are starting to slow down. So if you don't get on with it, you might miss your moment. I mean, it's not necessarily a big deal if you miss your moment. Perhaps you've done all you can and you're ready for the transition, and that transition is the moon moving into Virgo. And that transition from the moon to Virgo is going to be particularly important if you're in the Americas, because in California it'll be sort of late morning. In sort of New York, I think that would be sort of the early afternoon, around lunchtime. So when the moon moves from Leo to Virgo, things do slow down, and you realize perhaps that there are just things that need to be attended to. You don't necessarily want to attend to them. As far as you're concerned, there might be better things to do, but if you're honest and realistic, you'll recognize perhaps that there really just isn't an alternative, and getting down to things, sorting out the details where necessary, could be important, and it may not necessarily be quite as boring as it sounds. If you really look at things closely, you might just notice things that you just hadn't seen before, and that could stir you to create change, in the end. And there might be plenty of things that you want to point out, that you want to tell people about, because, you've seen them. You've seen things close up. Now you start to get it. But you shouldn't be in a hurry to tell everyone what you've discovered. And perhaps you need more time. You need more time to understand the implications of what you've noticed. Now, Moon moving out of Leo and into Virgo means that once again there are no planets in fire signs, and so over the course of the day you just might feel a sort of a collapse in energy. It's not like you're going to be feeling weak or anything like that, just a lack of application. You might notice that perhaps other people aren't particularly inspired and you don't feel particularly inspired. And it's great to be inspired, but you can't always be inspired. Sometimes you've just got to do what is necessary, do what's in front of you, and not complain too much. Now, as far as other people are concerned, I think there's some danger that you get confused, that you don't fully understand what's happening and what other people are saying. They might be saying lots of things. They might be presenting themselves in a way that you don't necessarily understand, and there could be sort of mixed messages. Yeah, you could reach wrong conclusions, perhaps because you're going to be inappropriately impulsive, certainly in the way you make up your mind. And so that's another good reason for taking things slowly, not feeling that you have to do anything, that you always have to respond. Perhaps it's just a time to just watch and just soak up the vibes without doing anything in the outside world. But as far as your own private world is concerned, I think there are definitely things you can do, things that you can really focus on, and I think that you can be pretty effective. Taurus, there isn't a massive amount going on today. I mean, that is a message that I'm probably going to be telling most people. So, you shouldn't have, too many expectations. But in some respects, today might be more active than yesterday. I think that you might start to see possibilities, even if you aren't always able to take advantage of these possibilities. And you maybe feel that when the moon moves out of Leo into Virgo, that you just might feel better, because while the moon has been in Leo, it hasn't necessarily been great. I mean there's nothing wrong with the moon in Leo, but from your perspective, it might have just slowed you down. Leo is a fixed sign. Of course, you're a fixed sign as well. So there's perhaps too much fixity, too much dead weight there. And so when the moon moves out of a fixed sign into Virgo, a mutable sign, it could be that many Taurians just find it easier to be themselves, easier to express how they feel, and there may be just something you want to get going on, and perhaps you hadn't had a chance in the past, but now with the sign change you can perhaps afford to be more flexible, and in the process you might have to make some changes or even inform people of a new reality, just perhaps something you see. And the moon in Virgo does make a square to Uranus, and it just could be, Taurus, that you just become aware of something. You might become aware of a cost. You didn't think the cost existed, but you are perhaps realizing that something costs maybe more money than expected, or there's a financial dimension that you hadn't fully taken into account in the past, and now it's becoming clear, and as a result you feel that you want to do something about it, that you want to take action. And at the same time, with the moon in Virgo, we can see that Taurus as being fairly creative. You can really think about what you can do well, and there are many things you can do well, and additionally you have the capacity at the moment to surprise yourself. You do something which you perhaps regard as just being very ordinary, or it could be something you've never done before. could be an experiment, and you do it, and straight away it feels familiar, and it's surprising for you, and it might also be surprising for other people. And so perhaps, one of the sort of fortunate side effects of the moon moving into Virgo is that you have a chance to expand your creative horizons. Just do something that you just feel good about, and once you get going on it, perhaps there'll be no stopping you. But you do have to make a small change. You can't just do things in the same old way. You do need, as I've already said, you do need some flexibility, and you've got to be ready to just try something out. And you shouldn't be afraid of making a fool of yourself. And that can often be a problem. It can be that fear of embarrassment that prevents you from being creative. But I do think that would be unnecessary. Gemini. Slowly, things are changing, Gemini. And you can see it. You're thinking about it, and you might have, to an extent, tried to speak about it. It's always good to try to talk. Tell everyone what's on your mind. But perhaps you're now feeling that people aren't always listening. They can hear you, they can respond to you, but really, do they understand what you're trying to say? And maybe the answer is that they don't, and it's not a permanent state of affairs, but it just might be something you feel perhaps over the last few days, that there's just a limit how much people get it. And with the moon moving out of Leo into Virgo, this might in one sense slow things down. Perhaps you'll start to become more aware of your priorities and the fact that a certain amount of stability is important to you. It's great to want stability. Change can be exhausting. Even Geminis can recognize that change can be exhausting. But the moon, when it does move into Virgo, it does make a square to Uranus. And this square to Uranus could make you quite independent-minded. That is a manifestation of Uranus. Uranus is not like Neptune. Neptune likes to overcome boundaries. Uranus is perhaps quite aware of differences, and wants to very often assert its independence. And maybe that's what Geminis are going to want to do. You don't want people in your way. You don't want people upsetting you, and you want to be free to largely, do what you want in your own way, in your own space, without having to explain very much. And that might not sound great, but it's just the way you feel. And this does perhaps have an impact on relationships. I think that some Geminis at the moment, it might give the impression of being quite cold and aloof. It's not that you are a cold and aloof person, it's just the way you're feeling at the moment. And I don't think, Gemini, you're particularly in the mood for sharing. And there are things that you perhaps want to keep to yourself. Me, I'm a Gemini. Do I feel that? Well, my forecasts for the 12 signs are probably going to be briefer than usual in this video, so maybe you could say that I'm not quite so happy to share my insights. Maybe that's how it seems. I mean, I would argue that there just isn't much going on astrologically. There's not much that I find particularly exciting about the astrological situation right now. So maybe that's my aloofness. But I don't think I'm being aloof. I just think I'm being realistic. That just isn't so much going on. And Gemini, perhaps you should accept that. But Gemini, when the moon goes into Virgo, it may not go into Virgo until tomorrow if you're in Australasia. But when the moon goes into Virgo, don't feel that you have to entirely shut up shop and retreat. Because moon does go into Virgo once a month. It's not exactly unusual. And with the South Node in Virgo, you can take things too far. You might be just too into yourself, too into your space, too into what is important to you, without necessarily being aware of what else is going on, what other pressures are there. And just because there is a pressure doesn't mean you should ignore it. Sometimes you have to accept that there is outside pressure, outside demands, people expecting things, and you have to at least meet the challenge halfway. Yeah, you've got to look after yourself, but sometimes you've got to demonstrate that you have got something to offer. What do they say? From each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. Isn't that a sort of a standard sort of Marxist formulation? And so from each according to their abilities. You have abilities, and there may be an expectation that you share these abilities. So Gemini, don't keep everything to yourself. Cancer. The moon is changing sign. It's moving out of Leo and into Virgo. And I think that sign change, from, your perspective, isn't too much of a problem. I mean, there are advantages of the moon being in Leo. There are advantages of the moon being moon being in Virgo. I mean, one aspect that we do have today is a sextile aspect between the sun and the moon. So, I think sextiles between the sun and the moon, all things being equal, are great. And with this sextile, there may be times when you just feel at one with yourself. You feel comfortable. And this is a case, even if you feel that, you're living in an unstable world, perhaps other people are all over the place, but not you. You are centered with this sun sextile the moon. And, when the moon moves into Virgo, I think there is a feeling that you can be yourself, and perhaps you can start to tell other people how you feel, but you don't have to do anything that is, especially dramatic. I mean, there may be pressure to be dramatic or to respond. The moon is making a square to Uranus. So moon square Uranus, moon in Virgo square Uranus in Gemini. This might be about, unconscious material, or things occurring to you, things happening in a way that is not entirely obvious. I mean, it's not obvious to other people, but is very obvious to you. You can see that some kind of change has happened or is in the process of happening, and you do feel that you really need to respond to it. I think that that might be very, very important to you. So have an open mind. Don't feel that you've got all the answers. And, do listen to your feelings. And if it just occurs to you that something has shifted, that you need perhaps a different approach, then, be reasonable and, accept the change. And also, Cancer, if you need to shake things up, perhaps by saying things, suggesting things, or, even being critical, I think you very much can be. In fact, Cancerians at the moment are going to be very good at pointing things out, things that other people either haven't noticed or they don't want to notice, but, you make it clear that these things, are important. And finally, we have Jupiter moving into sidereal Cancer, and I'm not quite sure whether that's relevant to you. I mean, Cancer in the Vedic astrology is there's a 24-degree difference. So Jupiter goes into Cancer when it's at 24 degrees of the sign, approximately. I mean, 23, 24. So if you have a planet in very late Cancer, say 23 or 24 of the sign, then that planet will be double Cancer. So, for example, if you were born on the 20th of July and your sun was at, say, 27 degrees Cancer, then your sun would be in Cancer in both Western and Eastern zodiac, or not necessarily just your sun. Could be your moon, or it could be your ascendant. So if you have any planets, or your ascendant or your moon in late Cancer, then you might really feel that Jupiter sign change. But I don't want to bother you with it too much. It probably isn't particularly relevant to you, but I think it's something that I did want to point out. Leo, enjoy the moon moving through the last degrees of your sign. And the moon, while it is moving through Leo, is making a sextile to the sun. And this moon sextile sun, if you're in the Americas, it could be pretty early in the day. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then you've got this moon sextile sun all day long. But with the moon sextile sun, it may not be exact, but at some level you are going to feel it. You are going to feel quite good about yourself. And moon sextile sun is about things being properly balanced, and perhaps the positive and the negative are in accord with one another. So if recently you felt out of balance, then with moon sextile sun, you have a chance to get yourself back into balance. So that might be one thing that you need to be thinking about. And then we have the moon moving out of Leo and into Virgo. And with this sign change, it might be that some Leos have to think about what is possible, what can be done, and with the resources you have. There is a focus on resources. You're going to have all sorts of ideas, all sorts of plans, but the question is, do you have what it takes to put them all into action? And when I talk about resources, I mean, it could be about your physical resources. How much energy have you got? Might also be about your financial resources, or even your educational resources. We know what you have learnt, what you have studied. So that could be another way in which the moon in Virgo starts to operate. And the moon in Virgo does make a square to Uranus. And so, Leo, it's possible that you have a realization that you haven't got what it takes, at least in the first instance, to get where you need to go. So if you do have that feeling, don't worry about it. You do have a chance to make up. So where do you need to make up? Is it that you need more money, or is it that you need to learn something new? So these are possibilities that you should be aware of, and you shouldn't regard these as serious limitations. You shouldn't feel that you have a realization you can't do something, then that's just the end of the matter. You're stuck. You've got to give up. No, it's not like that. You have a realization also of what you need to do, and it might take longer than expected. But if you're really determined, then I do think that you've got what it takes. Also, Leo, I think that there is, some danger that you you get confused. You might go for the wrong things. You might see something that is exciting and you'll want to go for it. Why would this be the case? I mean, it might be the case, because the moon is leaving Leo. Moon is not in a fire sign anymore, so you're still looking for excitement, you're looking for action, you're looking for something, and you might be looking too hard. And if you look for something, you might find it, but in what form and where is this going to take you? And there's some danger that you get tempted off the path, or you're encouraged to do something which may not be good for you. And if something looks shiny and glamorous, you might want to go for it. It seems exciting, seems harmless, but you do need to be careful. Virgo. Moon is moving into your sign, and the moon, when it moves into Virgo, it does make a square to Uranus. So when moon moves into Virgo, well, it kind of depends where you are. If you're in California, the moon will move into Virgo late morning, even earlier if you're in Hawaii or Alaska. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon, won't move into Virgo until tomorrow, but it's getting there. And if you're in Europe, this evening you can perhaps benefit from the moon being in Virgo. I mean, benefit is the operative word. I mean, it is good to have the moon in your sign, and the moon, when it moves into Virgo, it makes a square to Uranus, and moon square Uranus is quite an exciting aspect. It's dynamic, it's action orientated, and perhaps it's about you realizing things, realizing what you need to do, perhaps realizing where you have gone wrong in the past, and it just hits you. Perhaps you hadn't been ambitious enough, you'd perhaps been too cautious, and you just wanted things to be as stable as possible. But stability and certainty, they can be problematic, especially now that Uranus is in Gemini. Uranus in Gemini, it is a time where hopefully Virgos were aware that they really could take things further if they gave themselves the chance. And so moon square Uranus perhaps makes you see what you could do if you had the chance. And it might also say something about the future, how you deal with Uranus and Gemini, over the next few years. So, if you think about Uranus, Uranus is going retrograde. Uranus is, getting ready to leave Virgo, go back into Taurus, but, it's not going to be in Taurus forever. And, next year, Uranus will go back into Gemini, and it will stay in Gemini for quite a few years. And this is a time, Virgo, when you really can do something which is quite spectacular, and it could be unsettling as well. So Virgo, if you are getting these kind of thoughts and these ideas, and you're feeling maybe ever so slightly frustrated because you can't do all the things you want to do, if you are feeling like this, then maybe the last thing you want to worry about is other people, particularly if other people are not supportive of your ambitions. Just having to deal with people for the sake of it might not be something you necessarily want to do. And it could be that you come over as being someone who is a bit difficult. And the reason you might come over as being difficult is because at some level you don't really want to engage. You don't want to really involve yourself with people, especially on an emotional level. And there is nothing wrong with this. I think that at the moment, Virgo, you're very aware of how you and other people are different. Even if you really care about these people, even if you love these people, there's still an awareness of differences. And it's important that you respect your own differences and you respect your own separateness. And so if you can really concentrate on your separateness, but not in a negative way. It's not like feeling that you are estranged from the world, that you are isolated. It may instead be a case where you do need to tune into your individuality, and in order to do that, you don't really need anyone's help. In fact, other people's help might be worse than useless. Libra. Today, the moon is starting to move into Virgo. Virgo is the sign, just before Libra. And so, when the moon moves into Virgo, it perhaps reminds you that at some level you do appreciate your own company. You don't always have to be out there in the world. You don't have to always make a special effort to be sociable, a special effort to make other people feel comfortable. Instead, you've got things to do on your own. And even before the moon moves into Virgo, when the moon is in late Libra, it might just be a time where Librans feel that they need to sort of wrap things up. You can do it in a way that is polite, but it's probably not a time where you want to make extra commitments. So if anyone suggests, for example, you meet them over the next few days, or you spend time with them, it might not always be a good idea, because I think at the moment, Libra, your separateness, is becoming important. I mean, it was a similar message to what I was telling Virgo, and there are some similarities in the experience of Libras and Virgos, but I think that it is slightly different. I think because in your case, Libra, you do need space, and it may be you need space to simply recharge your batteries. When the moon is in Virgo, it can make all of us very sensitive, sort of on a physical and psychological level, and perhaps you in particular. And you may need time just to do nothing, just to just be yourself and not feel that there is any particular pressure. Though the moon in Virgo does make a square to Uranus, and this square to Uranus could be about something being revealed, something coming into awareness, and it just happens quite quickly. And it could be, Libra, that you had been thinking about something for quite a long time, and you weren't quite sure where it was all going, and suddenly it makes sense. This can happen through a dream. I mean, if you think about dreams, dreams can just make you realize something which is completely obvious. And it's like I remember in the 90s, when I was in therapy, I had this dream about my therapist, and I dreamt that he was going away. I can't remember the precise dream, but I definitely dreamt he sort of was going away. And I told him about my dream in therapy. That's what you do when you're in therapy. It just every single thing, however insignificant, you just spill it all out. And I told him about this dream, and then he replied, and he said, "Well, I think it's now time to tell you that I'm leaving London. So therapy sessions are coming to an end." So at an unconscious level, I had sort of was becoming aware of it. I'm not saying that my therapist leaving London was a complete disaster or anything like that. I think I was getting a bit wary of paying for therapy, so perhaps I was, at some level, I was quite relieved about it. But we do sometimes have dreams which just tell us the truth. because we're in denial, we can't see it, we don't want to see it, but the dream just tells us, and that maybe says something about moon square Uranus. And it may not be about a dream, it just might be something that you just imagine, and it's just an imagining, and you just think it's nothing and you discard it, but it could be very important. It could be the answer you've been looking for. So don't completely disregard your unconscious self. And the unconscious is also important because it puts you in tune with things. It puts you in tune with the world around you, with the cosmos, and perhaps where your precise niche is. And Libra, you do have a niche. You do have a place where you are exceptional, where you can do things that other people can't do. And do be aware of this. Don't doubt yourself. Don't think that you can't give something a go. And if you show the world what you can do, there might be a moment of realization and surprise when you see, hold on, you can do this really well. This is an important ability. So, it's very important, Libra, that you're not too modest. I mean, modesty is always a great thing to be. It's always good to be modest, but you can overdo it, and you can hide things which really are an important part of who you are. Scorpio. Right now, Scorpio, things are changing. I'm not saying that they're changing in a sort of huge way, but I think that some of your priorities are starting to shift. Maybe you're not quite so concerned about making, instant progress, being super successful, totally focusing on one or two ambitions. And, maybe you can start to be, more relaxed and more reasonable. And I think that your social abilities should improve as the day progresses. And, the reason they're improving is, I think, because you are more relaxed and reasonable, and you're perhaps finding it easier to understand what other people want, what's motivating them. And so that is perhaps useful. And also you can have some insights about other people. The moon is moving into Virgo. It's making a square to Uranus, and so when you attempt to get on with people, get close to them, you start to see things that you just hadn't seen before, and these things could be surprising. And so what do you do now? Being a Scorpio, you might be defensive. And why would you be defensive? Well, you could be defensive just because you've seen something, or you're seeing something that you just haven't seen before, and it just could be or could feel ever so slightly threatening. But I mean, there's no need to be threatened. I think that instead you should welcome the variety. And I think that is important. You perhaps need a change. Sometimes you can be just overly focused. And when you're overly focused, well, you miss things. You become blinkered even. And so, by seeing what other people are doing, you can benefit. But you don't want to get too caught up with other people. There's some danger that if you spend too much time with certain people, their own emotional material starts to seep out, and perhaps you're aware of it, and boundaries might get overwhelmed, in a way that is quite subtle. The seawater seeping through the boundaries, and it's kind of difficult to perceive, but at some stage, if you're not careful, you might get sort of overwhelmed by another person's problems. And what you don't want is anyone to dump their problems onto you. They might not even deliberately do this. It might just be that there are leaks. People just can't help expressing who they are and who is anyone dumping their problems onto you. They may not even deliberately do this. It just may be that other people are porous, and you might be porous as well. Their feelings and insecurities start seeping out, and you pick up on them, and you become influenced by this, and this could undermine you. But I think it would be unnecessary, Scorpio. I think it's important right now that you have a strong sense of your own boundaries, and this should be something you can do. I mean, after all, Mars, your ruler, is in Scorpio, and also Mercury is beginning to make a conjunction to Mars. So, with this Mercury conjunct Mars, I think increasingly you are able to look after yourself, and you're able to respond, and you're able to make it clear, what is acceptable and what you regard as being intolerable, perhaps. Maybe that's too strong. But if someone is going too far, then I don't think that you'll have any difficulty, saying what is on your mind and defending yourself, with words. So it might be, Scorpio, a day which could be complicated, but I wouldn't sort of, exaggerate. I think that you can get on well with people, provided you don't get too close to them. If you do get close to someone, there are going to be risks. Sagittarius. You start the day with a certain balance. You feel that you are in the right place, and that you're not being too extreme. You're not in too much of a hurry. You're not being too lazy. You perhaps feel that you have just sort of got it right, and you've got it right perhaps out of a process of understanding. You've perhaps done a lot of thinking, and you've seen things which have, in their own way, been sort of quite enlightening, and you have a fairly clear idea of where things should be going. And now perhaps it's time to sort of move to the next stage. Yeah, it's all very well having a sense of balance, but you've got to do something with it, and you've almost got to do something which might put you out of balance, because if you want progress, you do need to often upset things, just a bit. And we have got the moon moving into Virgo, and the moon, when it moves into Virgo, it does make a square to Uranus, and this might be the process of creating a lack of balance, putting things out of sync because it's necessary. And it's a dynamic process, and as a Sagittarian, you are maybe aware of this, and it might then be a good idea to actually seek something, or maybe someone, who has the potential to be a little bit destabilizing. Because if there's too much stability, well, nothing can happen. You maybe can do things in the same old ways, but you need progress, and perhaps Sagittarius, at some level, that is, what you are looking for. And so Sagittarius, as the moon moves into Virgo, moon might not move into Virgo until tomorrow if you're in Australasia, or this evening if you're in Europe. When the moon does eventually get into Virgo, it is a chance to really think about what is important to you. And it may be a process of separating the wheat from the chaff. There are certain things you might be interested in, but you just know they're irrelevant. They don't really matter. You can worry about them at a later stage. But there are other things that really are essential. And now you're starting to recognize them, and you're prepared to really give it your best shot. And in the process, you might have to upset something. Though, in general, Sagittarius, it seems that your verbal abilities right now are extremely good. You can explain yourself very well, and also you can articulate your vision, whatever that vision might be. And I think over the last few days, while the moon has been in Leo, I think that vision has perhaps been sort of intensified and has become real up to a point. But now you want something more. Visions are not enough. You want something to happen, in the real world. And so now you can tell everyone about it, tell people about what you want. And also, Sagittarius, you can show off what you can do. It's not about boasting. You're only going to show off about something if you know that you're doing a good job. You know that you're doing something that is, genuinely creative. And so, Sagittarius, feel free to explain. Feel free to draw people in to your world, and show them what you're doing. Don't feel that they're not going to be interested. I think they are going to be interested. And so perhaps part of your job today is to pique other people's curiosity. But again, there's nothing vague about it. It's because you want to move on, and you want perhaps everyone else to move on as well. And so, Sagittarius, you can brighten people up, perhaps through what you've learnt, but also through your practicality. I know that Sagittarius is not always seen as being a particularly practical sign. I mean, all the 12 signs have their own practicalities, so no one is impractical just because of their sign. But right now, Sagittarius, you are perhaps more practical than usual, and you really do seem to understand what needs to be done, and you have a good sense of timing. You know that certain things have to be done by a particular deadline, and if you miss that deadline, then you might not get another chance for maybe not for months. Capricorn. It's a day when things are going your way. I mean, not necessarily in a very spectacular way. I'm not saying that today is going to be hugely dramatic. It's not that kind of day, and it really doesn't matter what your sign is. It's a fairly downbeat day for everyone, and this, I think, is reflected by my forecasts, for the 12 signs. I have, been perhaps a little bit boring in my descriptions of the 12 signs. But, as far as you're concerned, Capricorn, it's a time when you can, I think, be yourself, and also you can, find out what's going on. Perhaps recently you haven't been so interested, or you perhaps have wanted to look the other way, or you didn't want to get sidetracked by things that appeared irrelevant and unimportant. But there's always a place for the inquiring mind, and the more you can inquire, the more you can understand, the better. And it's not like you're going to be overwhelmed. You know what's important, and you can tell that that some things really are crucial, and that other things can be safely ignored. And this is not just about the world of matter. It's also about the world of ideas, and you have to think about how your own ideas are developing. And there are always ways in which ideas can change, in which you can create a system which is increasingly comprehensive and can increasingly explain the world. I mean, that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to create a system. We're trying to explain everything without having to think about it. And right now, Capricorn, you are able to put things together in a way that is increasingly effective, and also Capricorn, don't forget that it is a time when you can make things happen, when you can really project yourself. I know I've said it before on several occasions, but Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn. Venus is in Libra. Well, when I say mutual reception, it's in mutual reception by exaltation, and this does put you in a really good position, to take things which maybe are theoretical and turn them into something that can be used in the real world, and which you can use to pursue whatever agenda is important to you. So Capricorn, it's a day when you can get things done, and you can certainly align yourself, but you have to do it your way. It's not about following anyone else's path. I mean, that. And so Capricorn, get ready for a new challenge. I mean, it's a gentle challenge, but it's a challenge of just understanding the way things come together, and being ready to make the most of what is available. And a lot is available for you right now, and it's going to get better. Venus is in Libra. Venus is in Libra until the beginning of next month. I have to remind you, because Venus doesn't stay in Libra for long. I mean, it's a fast-moving planet, but right now you really do have an opportunity to project yourself and get favorable attention. Aquarius, it may be the case that something is in a state of change. Perhaps you're seeing it in a different way, and maybe you're feeling sort of ever so slightly bored. Something that maybe used to be exciting, used to be novel, but now it's not quite so exciting. It's becoming just too regular, too much part of the scenery, and it's now maybe a time to be moving on. And so that is something that you are thinking about, and perhaps this does relate to other people. Well, you're seeing a side to them that maybe you hadn't seen before, or you're just being reminded about something. You perhaps were assuming the best, and you were enjoying people for what they were, but you now have to look at things from a different perspective, and this is maybe something that you're not entirely comfortable with. And the moon is making a square to Uranus, and this might relate to the way you feel. The moon in Leo is it's in your opposite sign. Moon in Leo is very much about how you relate to others, but then making a square to Uranus, there is a clash there, and this clash might have a creative element. You are a creative person, Aquarius, especially now that Uranus is in Gemini. We still have a grand trine in air signs. Uranus is trine Pluto, Venus is trine Uranus and Pluto. This does emphasize your creativity, and it may be that you feel that certain people and certain situations are at odds with what you want to do. You don't want to do what you're told. You don't want to follow anyone else's ideas. You've got it worked out, and if you were to do what you're told, if you were to take into account other people and other people's idiosyncrasies, that your overall effect would be watered down, and most importantly, you wouldn't be able to sort of maximize your potential. And so because of all that, you might feel that having a bit of distance is important. And I think you'd be right. If you're on your own, or at least if you haven't got other people really closely around you, watching what you're doing, scrutinizing you, well, you're not going to be able to think straight. But if you do have some distance, you're going to be able to sort of put your energy into something that is important, and you're going to be able to find a way to really make the most of who you are. And in the process, it is going to be very important that you safeguard your precious independence. Pisces, you know that things have to be done in a particular way. Now, that's a formulation that doesn't sound particularly Piscean. Pisces is a sign that has a reputation for perhaps being variable, for being able to move with the tide, do things in a particular way, and maybe improvise up to a point. Pisces is not a fixed sign. Pisces can just go with the flow. But at the moment, Pisces, you do understand that there may only be one way of doing something. You'd love it if there were several ways of doing it, but that's not the reality of the situation. And if there's only one way of doing something, then it is important that you do it properly. And you have to be able to do it properly right until the end. So just because you have sorted something out like 90% of the way, you've got to go all the way. It's like when you download this huge file. You download this file, and it may take you all day to download it, and it says it's 99% downloaded. Now, if you turn your computer off or you turn your internet off, very often that's it. Doesn't matter if you've been downloading this file for 3 weeks, gone. So you have to wait until something has finished downloading, until a process has been done. I mean, it's like when I process these videos, I have to sort of put the bits together, and then the processing can take an hour. But I can't just stop the process 1 second before the hour, because if I do, I have to start all over again. And that may be the way it is for you now, Pisces. You have to be allowed to finish, and it doesn't matter what the pressure is. You've got to be able to see it through to completion. And once that completion is found, you'll find that you have the freedom to do what you want, by and large, and you'll be able to give people the attention they feel they deserve. Maybe people do deserve attention, but you give them your attention when the moment is right, when you're good and ready. And the moon does eventually move into Virgo, your opposite sign, and with the moon moving into Virgo, it's quite likely that other people are going to take up more of your time. You might not want them to take up more of your time, but I think that you can probably accommodate them to some extent. And the moon, though, does make a square to Uranus. And this moon square to Uranus, it's a difficult aspect, potentially, moon square Uranus. And certain social and interpersonal situations could make you annoyed. It just feels that someone's getting in your way, someone is stirring you up, and it perhaps doesn't take much to stir you up at the moment. If someone does the wrong thing, or if someone oversteps a mark, then Pisces, I think that you might respond in a fairly dramatic way. But the question is, do you really have to be dramatic? And what is the best way to respond? At the moment, Pisces, your ability to talk is extremely good. You have a natural facility. At the same time, you just can come over as being really a very talented and creative person, and you can talk about yourself and what you do well, and you can talk about it in such a way that people are going to be interested in you. And if people are interested in you, well, that makes things a lot easier. And so Pisces, don't hide who you are. And perhaps Pisces, you've been involved in a few things which you haven't been particularly open about them, but maybe it's time to show what you can do. I think when the world sees what you're doing, then I think that they're going to be, very impressed. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it is time to look at things from the perspective of the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 61, Inner Truth. And this hexagram is very balanced. It's got symmetry, and you can see the empty space in the middle of the hexagram, because those central lines, the third and the fourth lines, are both broken. So there is a space for us to learn. We know we haven't got all the answers, and so we're ready to listen. We're ready to take on board the truth, whatever it might be. But when you're dealing with the inner truth, we are aware of our limitations, and I think that is tremendously important with this hexagram. We have the bottom line moving, and the bottom line is often about the start of things, and we perhaps understand how early we are, that perhaps we're not sufficiently prepared. So if you're confronted with something big, some project that you want to do today, and you want to get it done today, then maybe now might not be the right time. Instead, it should be a time to marshal your resources and look at your own weaknesses and what you don't have. That's all about the inner truth, and part of the inner truth is being self-aware. And if we can't do something straight away, if we need more time, we can be honest about it. And then the third line from the bottom moves, and this third line from the bottom is really encouraging us to think about the inner, who we are, what is the basis of who we are, and what is the basis of how we feel, because there is a danger that our happiness is influenced by external events, how someone behaves, what's happening in the world. Some people might be worried about what's happening in the stock market. Now, these are external events which shouldn't have any impact on our happiness, but they often do. And so try to be independent, try to regard happiness as being your happiness. You need to be responsible for it, and you can't be in a situation where things outside your control do impact your happiness. I say you can't be in a situation. Of course, the reality is that many people, myself included, are influenced by external events, and we can be sort of completely, overwhelmed by these events, and we lose our centering. And of course, centering is very important with inner truth. If you look at that hexagram, there is a center to it, and so we need to take responsibility for everything. We need to be in control of our own life. We can't just be a victim of external circumstances over which we have no influence. Now, this hexagram, in a truth, it does move. It moves to hexagram number 57, which is the gentle. This is a hexagram which I don't think has cropped up for some time. I really regret not making a record of all the hexagrams that I created doing these videos, well, now over the years. I mean, it's all random, you could say, so you wouldn't have expected any particular hexagram to be more frequent than any other from a statistical perspective. But the gentle, I don't think we've seen it for a bit of time, and so this is where it's all moving. And the gentle, well, the symbolism is, well, you've got a double trigram. You've got the wind over the wind, so that's what that trigram is. And the gentle is about the wind, and it's about the wind sort of moving through something, perhaps moving through a house, and it's trying to understand it, and it's often trying to look to the source of a problem. The I Ching might go further and talk about the source of an evil, and maybe the previous hexagram, inner truth, could be referring to some kind of imbalance, a situation where we're not in control as much as we should be, where we do find it difficult to be self-reliant, where from a psychological perspective, we are aware of our own failings. And I'm not talking about any sort of psychological issues like health or whatever. We all have psychological issues, and we all know that we're not perfect, and we could make things better. And so the gentle is about the wind getting to the root of the problem, and maybe there's something we have to get to the root of. It could be in ourselves, it could be in terms of our immediate environment, but something just needs to be solved. Something is holding us back, and the first hexagram, inner truth, that's what it's all about. Can we find that inner truth? And I think that in the end we can, but we have to go with the wind. The wind sort of goes through all the rooms of a house, goes through the corridors. It's looking for something, and then finally it finds it. It finds the source of the problem, and then there's the question: well, what are we going to do? Are we going to be able to remove the problem, or is that going to be too difficult? Well, that is up to us, but I think the suggestion is that the problem can be removed if we want it to. But you have to look at this in terms of whatever your individual situation is. And finally, I want to look at Jupiter moving into Cancer. So if we talk about Jupiter moving into Cancer, I'm talking about the sidereal zodiac. So let me just show you what I mean. So when I say sidereal zodiac, in Western astrology, we tend to use the tropical zodiac. We use a zodiac which is based on the seasons. So 0 degrees Aries is when the sun is at 0 degrees Aries. The Aries point is the beginning of spring in the northern hemisphere. It's when the sun crosses the celestial equator going northwards. But it's not the only zodiac used, and there is the sidereal zodiac, and sidereal I think comes from the word sidereus, which I believe is Latin for star. And so there are different ways of comparing the two zodiacs, and something that we do have to think about is the Ayanamsha, and the Ayanamsha is the difference between the Western zodiac, the tropical zodiac, and the sidereal zodiac, and there are different Ayanamshas. For example, there is the Krishnamurti Ayanamsha, there is the Fagan Bradley Ayanamsha, and the Ayanamsha that is most commonly used is the Lahiri Ayanamsha. That's spelled Lahiri, and that, I believe, is the most common Ayanamsha used in Vedic astrology. I may be wrong on that, but in India there are lots of different Ayanamshas are being used. So the Lahiri Ayanamsha at the moment is approximately 24 degrees. So that means that when Jupiter, for example, goes into sidereal Cancer using the Lahiri Ayanamsha, it happens when Jupiter is approximately 24 degrees Cancer, measured on the Western tropical zodiac. So here is the chart for the moment that Jupiter goes into sidereal Cancer. Now, this chart is the sidereal chart. So what I've done is I've taken 24 degrees off each of the signs. So I can change that back to the tropical zodiac just to show you. So if I make this the tropical zodiac, you can see that Jupiter is at 2413 Cancer. So this takes, so on October the 18th, which is a Saturday, at, I think this is right. I sort of did it by trial and error. This program shows degrees, minutes, and seconds. So I went for the moment that Jupiter sidereally is at 0 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds Cancer. Maybe I've got it slightly off. So that's the sidereal. That was the sidereal position, 0 degrees Cancer. But tropically, it's at 2413. So at that point, on Saturday, 3:15 p.m. London time, Jupiter in the Western zodiac is at 2413 Cancer. Eastern zodiac is at 0 degrees Cancer, and that is a big event, you could say, because Jupiter is moving into a sign in which it is exalted. So you could argue that Jupiter has suddenly become much stronger. Now, is that going to be good news? It should say something about what is what's happening in the world, and are things going to get better? Now, when I say that Jupiter has gone into sidereal Cancer, it doesn't stay in sidereal Cancer for very long. Let me just switch this back to the sidereal chart. There we are. So Jupiter is going stationary retrograde slowly, and it will be retrograde soon. And so what will happen is that Jupiter will retrograde back into sidereal Gemini. I think that happens next month. So that's it. So Jupiter's visit into sidereal Cancer is very brief, and I think the day that it goes back into back into Gemini, it goes retrograde on November the 12th, and it will go back into sidereal Gemini, I think, at the beginning of December. So how do we see this, and how does it impact your horoscope? Well, you have to have some idea of Vedic astrology there, and Vedic astrology is a system that tends to use a whole sign house. So in terms of what I mean by whole signs, the whole sign astrology has become quite popular in Western astrology. So, for example, I have got Taurus rising. So if I've got Taurus rising, and I've got what my Taurus is at. I've got 4 or 5 degrees Taurus rising. I've got Mars at 0 degrees Taurus. So that means that every planet I have in Taurus is going to likewise be in the first house. It's all going to be first house. So the houses are very much based on the signs. And Vedic astrology follows the same system. So planets in a house are all in the same sign. I mean, there are different approaches, of course, to Vedic astrology, and there will be approaches to Vedic astrology which don't follow that system, but the most popular method of using Vedic astrology does use whole sign houses. So here, for example, here's my chart from a Vedic perspective. So this is not my Western chart. Okay, I've got Taurus rising in. I've got my 4 degrees Taurus rising becomes Aries rising in the Vedic chart, and my Mars at 0 degrees Taurus goes back into Aries. So I have got Mars in Aries rising in my sidereal chart, and it looks like being a great Mars. I mean, Mars is the strongest planet in my chart, and when my Mars Dasha, when that started, I had 7 years of my Mars Dasha, and I was really excited about my Mars Dasha. And my Mars Dasha was miserable, absolutely miserable. So Vedic astrology can be very accurate, but it can be quite treacherous. I mean, why was my Mars Dasha so miserable? Well, I think perhaps Mars was just too strong. Mars perhaps caused too many problems. It might be a strong planet, but it was, in the first house, and it was perhaps aspecting the 7th house, so it wasn't necessarily such a good thing. Perhaps because it was too strong. Now, what I really want to talk about is Jupiter, and the fact that Jupiter has gone into Cancer, and so how might we experience this? I mean, in a general sense. Now, I'm not a Vedic astrologer. I usually use Western astrology. I know about Vedic astrology. There will be people out there who know more about it than me. Probably some of you know more about it than me. So there are certain charts that I always look at. You're probably bored of them. I always look at Macron's chart. I always look at Keir Starmer's chart. I look at Donald Trump's chart, for example. I look at Meghan's chart, Prince Harry's, Charles's chart. And I thought might be just a good idea to look at Jupiter in Cancer and how it might affect different people. So as far as I'm concerned, in my chart, I have Aries rising. So when Jupiter goes into Cancer, it moves into my 4th house. Temporarily, of course, Jupiter will go back into Gemini sidereally at the beginning of December. But Jupiter moving into the 4th house, you might think is not such a bad thing. It perhaps relates to the foundations of my life, maybe. And the 4th house, in my 4th house, I have the North Node, Rahu. And so at the moment, I'm in my Rahu Dasha. And my Rahu Dasha, I think it started in 2013. I mean, Rahu Dasha, well, it hasn't been a disaster. It hasn't been great. But maybe I can be optimistic because Jupiter is making an aspect to my Rahu. And it's Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer here. So maybe Jupiter making a conjunction to my Rahu. And remember, that conjunction is a whole sign conjunction. The moment Jupiter moves into Cancer, it aspects anything in Cancer, and so in this case, it would be Rahu. So maybe it's good news. Maybe it's something for me to be excited about. But anyway, you don't want to hear too much about my chart. As far as some famous people, some of the people I've spent a long time looking at. Well, there is Donald Trump. So here is Donald Trump's chart. This is his sidereal chart. All the charts I'll be looking at are sidereal. So Donald Trump has 29 degrees Leo rising. So in his Vedic chart, he has 6 degrees Leo rising. So that means that Jupiter is moving into his 12th house. And when it moves into his 12th house, the moment it moves into Cancer, it aspects his Cancer planets. I mean, let's not worry about Pluto. In Vedic astrology, you don't really use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. At least I don't. I think that one should stick to the system. Uranus and Neptune and Pluto are modernisms, and certainly when I do look at Vedic charts, I don't look at Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, or Charon, or any other minor planet. And so it's the fact that he's got Venus, and he's got a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer, and so Jupiter is triggering this. So there is this question here, which is is it unfortunate that Donald Trump has Venus and Saturn in his 12th house, or is it fortunate that Jupiter is about to aspect his Venus and his Saturn? I mean, he's got Jupiter making this aspect and to Venus and Saturn. So this does emphasize things of a sort of 12th house nature. Of course, the 12th house in Vedic astrology doesn't always mean everything that it means in Western astrology. I mean, Vedic astrology, the 12th house rules beds, it rules bedrooms, it also rules foreign travel. Now that might sound kind of strange. You think about the 9th house as being travel, but in Vedic astrology it's a 12th house, and I think the reason for this is that maybe from an Indian perspective, travel was seen as being unfortunate. You are leaving your village, you're leaving your family, you're having to go somewhere else, and it's a real break, and so it's perhaps not something that we should necessarily look forward to. And I'm quite sympathetic with this view, and I think that people talk too much about the joys of travel. So that may say something about Trump and travel, and him, how he benefits from when he's away from home, when he's away from his village, when he's away from his clan. And one way of looking at transits, Vedic astrology has this system called the Ashtaka Varga system. And so the way the Ashtaka Varga system is, it gives a weighting to each sign for each planet to indicate how strong a planet is in a particular sign. And it's a very mathematical process. When I say strong in a particular sign, by transit. And it's a mathematical process, and it takes a long time to work out. You can do it by hand, but it's better if the computer does it for you. And so Jupiter, when it's transiting Trump's Gemini, for Trump's chart, not for anyone else's chart, for Trump's chart, has 6 points. And 6 points out of perhaps a maximum of, maybe 7 or 8 points. So that's pretty close to the maximum. So Jupiter in Gemini, in sidereal Gemini, works pretty well for Trump. But then Jupiter moves into Cancer. And from an Ashtaka Varga point of view, it still has 6 points. So he moves from 6 points to 6 points. And so for Trump and his Jupiter transits, Jupiter in Gemini and Jupiter in Cancer are, all things being equal, quite strong places for Jupiter to be transiting, and that might mean that they have, particular benefits. So, maybe this Jupiter transit, Jupiter moving into sidereal Cancer, won't be so bad for Trump, and maybe he'll benefit from it. Maybe he'll benefit from Jupiter transiting his Saturn and his Venus. But I do need to give the matter some more thought. I mean, my main aim in this video is to just do a sort of a brief sort of overview. And another politician who has, I'm just going to look at some politicians again. All these charts are sidereal, so this is Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron has Capricorn rising in his Western chart. He also has Capricorn rising in his Eastern chart. So Jupiter is moving from his 6th house into his 7th house. And from an Ashtaka Varga perspective, while he had Jupiter in Gemini, it had 3 points. So transiting Jupiter was quite weak in Gemini. It wasn't really working very well for him. Yet in Cancer, it has 7 points. So from an Ashtaka Varga perspective, it may be that he does benefit from Jupiter moving into Cancer. Remember, this is only one thing, one way of looking at things. I'm not even sure that the Ashtaka Varga system works. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced by it, but I'm just telling you that there is this system available, and you've perhaps got to look at other subtleties. But you could also say with Jupiter moving into Cancer in his Vedic chart, it is his 7th house. It is about his rivals. It's about his enemies, and Jupiter is making an aspect to his Mars. So this is perhaps where the battle really starts, and he is in a battle. I mean, he's in a battle for political survival. And perhaps his enemies are certainly strong, but just something about Macron that just keeps going. So it will be interesting to see, how Jupiter moving into his 7th house works. But I think this really does emphasize now that it's all about how he deals with his rivals and whether he can get the better of them. I mean, it doesn't look good, but then on the other hand, from an Ashtaka Varga point of view, transiting Jupiter is more productive. It's more fortunate in Cancer than it was in Gemini. Now, continuing on the French theme, there is Marine Le Pen. And so Marine Le Pen getting a lot of news flow now because of the governmental crisis. And so Jupiter will be moving into her 11th house. Remember, all these charts I'm showing are set in a sort of Vedic way, although I'm using a Western format, but it's just kind of easier to use a Western format, and but to use the Leri Ayanamsha. So she has a lot of planets in sidereal Cancer. She's got Mars in Cancer, she's got Mercury in Cancer, she's got the Sun in Cancer. So Jupiter is picking up, quite a busy house. Now, as far as Ashtaka Varga is concerned, she moves from Jupiter was in her 10th house, and it will of course go back into her 10th house in December because of its retrograde motion. But it moves from her 10th house into her 11th house. And Ashtaka Varga, her Jupiter gets 5 points in Gemini and 4 points in Cancer. So there's not a big change there. But maybe Jupiter in Cancer is quite motivating for her. It does stir up those planets, Mars, Mercury, and the Sun. I mean, I will be looking at this in greater detail in another video. I'm not really trying to do a real interpretation here. I'm just sort of just speculating, about how Jupiter in Cancer, might be working, and the fact that Jupiter has changed sign. Do think about your own chart. So, when you are thinking about your own chart, just convert it in your head to a sidereal chart. It's very easy. You just take everything in your chart and just reduce it by 23, 24 degrees, and then there is the king, the British king. So here's Charles's chart. That's King Charles III. So Jupiter's going into his 1st house, and from an Ashtaka Varga perspective, he moves from when Jupiter in Taurus, it had 5 points. Jupiter in Gemini, it had 5 points. In Cancer, it has 6 points. So a slight improvement there. And with Jupiter moving into his Gemini, moving into Cancer, well, that is perhaps a beginning for him. But the first house can say something about your health, and so there may be issues there, things for him to consider. And Jupiter, when it's in the first house, it aspects his 5th house, because in Vedic astrology, aspects are sign by a sign to sign. They're not to the degree. So Jupiter aspects the 5th and the 9th house from itself. So when Jupiter moves into Cancer, it will be aspecting Mars, and so he has a very sort of strong Mars in Scorpio there. I know he's got Mars and Sagittarius in his Western chart, but it goes back into Scorpio. And then maybe that Mars in Scorpio says something about one of his children. The 5th house is the ruler of children. So perhaps Jupiter in his first house aspecting Mars, well, the question is which child, or is it both children? Is there something good about one of his children, something to celebrate about one of his children? Is it going to be William? Is it going to be Harry? We I think, need to do some more thinking, more research there. Now, as far as Harry and Meghan are concerned, well, here's a chart for Prince Harry. So Jupiter is moving into his 8th. Now Harry's 7th house. Jupiter has been in his 7th house, and well, there's always 7th house issues going on with poor Harry, isn't there? Constant speculation about his relationship with Meghan. So Jupiter is moving from his 7th house into his 8th house. Jupiter doesn't change its Ashtaka Varga strength. In Gemini, it has 6 points. In Cancer, it also has 6 points. But Jupiter is in the 8th, and as with his father, Jupiter is aspecting his Mars in Scorpio. So both Charles and Harry have Mars in sidereal Scorpio, and both with Jupiter in Cancer are getting the aspect here. But this is Jupiter in the 8th house, and that Mars is in the 12th house. So maybe Jupiter is going to represent a few problems. Maybe he is going to maybe run into some flack with his wife. I mean, that is one way of looking at it. It is a problem. It can be a problematic house for Jupiter to be in, but I don't think we can predict anything too bad on the basis of just the house. We have to look at the house strength, and there are other things that we need to consider, but that's not something I want to do in this video. I want to just very briefly look at a number of charts. And then there's his wife. There is Meghan. Here's her chart, and Meghan's sidereal chart. She's got Sun and Mercury in Cancer. So Jupiter moving out of Gemini into Cancer. Jupiter does have increased strength from an Ashtaka Varga view. So in Cancer, transiting Jupiter has 3 points. In Gemini, it has 3 points. In Cancer, it has 6 points. So there's a big boost for Jupiter, when it changes sign. And, Jupiter will be in the same sign as the Sun and Mercury. And, it might be, all about her. And, I've noticed that, in terms of Meghan, she's just been getting some really awful publicity recently. There are so many anti-Meghan videos that have cropped up, over the last week in particular. I haven't really been following her story too much. I mean, fundamentally, I'm not that interested in her, but she does have a very interesting chart. But maybe If I was advising Meghan, I think I'd say that there is scope for improvement here. However bad things seem to be, Jupiter changing sign, moving into sidereal Cancer, however bad things look, and according to many commentators, things are absolutely awful for her, but maybe things aren't quite so bad. And finally, Nigel Farage. He is leader of the Reform Party, and everyone is saying he's going to be the next Prime Minister. We do have a time of birth for Nigel Farage. So Jupiter is edging into his 12th house. And from an Ashtaka Varga point of view, when Jupiter was in Gemini, it had transiting Jupiter, it had 7 points. In Cancer, it only has 3 points. So it's possible with Jupiter moving into Gemini. Remember, he's got North Node in Gemini. Again, this is the Eastern chart. North Node works very well in Gemini. So he's had Jupiter in, transiting his 11th house with a strong North Node there, and things really have worked for him. He made a late decision to fight the 2024 election, and already he's being mentioned as the next British Prime Minister, or at least the next non-Labour British Prime Minister. But this sign change may not necessarily work in his favour, not just because it's bad that Jupiter is changing sign. It's causing problems. It's because some of the advantages he has had of Jupiter being in Gemini, he's starting to lose. So, and yes, with Jupiter moving into Cancer, there is this weakening. You move from 7 points down to 3 points. So it may be that politically, that this is his high watermark. Now, it is a slow process. Jupiter is about to move into sidereal Cancer. Beginning of December, it moves back into Gemini. But then later in 2025, it will go it will go direct, and then it will move into Cancer, once and for all. And well, not once and for all, but there will be some time. I don't know when it moves into Virgo, when it moves to Leo in the end, which of course it will do, but that's in a few years' time. So maybe this is his high watermark. I'm not saying it is, and of course I'm only looking at it from a perspective of his sidereal Jupiter, and there are certainly a lot of other things that need to be looked at. So those are a few thoughts on Jupiter in Cancer. I would urge you to look at your own chart. Remember, you've got to make that conversion to the sidereal chart. So you take the ascendant, whatever your ascendant is. If you know your ascendant, you knock off 23, 24 degrees. That will give you your sidereal ascendant. Then you'll be able to work out where your whole sign sidereal houses are, and then you'll be able to see which house Jupiter is about to transit. I mean, it's just an idea. I'm not saying that it's going to tell you anything spectacular, but it's always good to play with astrology and to play with other systems. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.